to an end. The first is that it is possible that the virus over time will become less aggressive and less dangerous. And there are epidemics of viruses like the coronavirus where there was an outbreak in humans, but it did seem just to disappear. And one of the hopes was, for example, this virus, we thought, doesn't like ultraviolet light. So come the summer, come sunlight, the virus would, if you like, die in the ultraviolet light. I have to say that so far that has proved to be not the case. It happens with some virus epidemics, but it doesn't with this one. The second way that maybe this viral epidemic could come to an end is the virus itself could mutate. Now, what do we mean by a mutation? A mutation is something that is slightly different genetically to its parent. So, and if you like, viruses reproduce the whole time. And when they get into our body, they produce copies, and they produce copies, and they produce copies, and they produce copies. And each copy of the virus produces is genetically slightly different from the previous one. And one of the things that we hoped that maybe the virus could possibly hang around, but maybe mutate, say, to a virus like the common cold virus. So it's around, but we don't need to worry about it. Now, there are some scientists who are saying this could still happen, and there's some research to suggest it might happen, but for the moment we have to accept that A, the virus isn't going to disappear on its own because of ultraviolet light, and at the moment there's no evidence that it's going to mutate to something more gentle. The third way that this disease might become under control is if we had a very effective treatment. If we knew when we got the virus, we could go to our GP, or we could go to the chemist and buy something, and that would clear up the virus, like an antibiotic might clear up an ear infection or a throat infection. That would be clearly something we would, in a sense, the virus might exist, but we don't need to worry about it. Now, I have to tell you that disappointingly, there is very little evidence at the moment that we have any effective drugs that are going to work for the general population to take. Now, that is not to say that both in universities and in drug companies, people are working round the clock to try and find a drug that will kill this virus and make it harmless. And that may happen. That is probably not going to happen for at least 18 months to 2 years. So those are four possible ways, each of which are unlikely. So what are we left with? Well, one way that the British government thought might be useful at the beginning of the epidemic was to allow something to develop called herd immunity. Now, some of you will be familiar with this and some of you won't. But in simple terms, this virus essentially can do its job because it goes from one human being to another human being. If all the human beings that it comes across are immune, then this virus can't spread. So if you can imagine that you've got a person who's standing in the middle of a circle, surrounded by people who are all immune. That person who is infected can't spread the virus to the people outside that circle. So one argument that British government thought, and others like the Swedish government, some of you may have heard about, and the Dutch, well, they said maybe if perhaps vulnerable people, elderly people stayed inside, and we let children and younger people develop it, enough people would be immune that the virus wouldn't be able to get through and attack enough people. But that herd immunity, you don't need 100% of the population to be protected, probably around about 70%. And that, for example, my friends, is how how people are protected against chickenpox. Chickenpox is a disease where so many people get a virus, so many people get it in childhood. If you get it in adult life, it can be really nasty. But because so many of us have had the chickenpox virus as a young child, which was harmless, the chickenpox virus can't establish itself as an epidemic. So where does that leave us? Well, we can achieve herd immunity, if not naturally, we can perhaps achieve it through a vaccine. And I guess you would have had to live on another planet recently not to have been aware of the work that's gone on, both by colleagues in Oxford and elsewhere, to develop a vaccine. There are 150 different vaccines being tested worldwide at the moment. 150 different vaccines being tested worldwide at the moment. And I have to say, maybe Oxford has been the most successful at publicising what it's doing. And in some ways, colleagues are fairly advanced. But there is absolute honesty amongst the people in Oxford and elsewhere that the Oxford vaccine may not be the success we hope it will be. And because of herd immunity, we don't need everybody to be vaccinated, but we probably need about 70 to 80% of people to be vaccinated. I would like to say a few words about the vaccine, because, you know, somebody says to me, when will we have a vaccine? Well, we have a vaccine. This glass of water could be the vaccine. We have a vaccine that has been tested in a large number of volunteers in the Oxford study, and there have been another vaccine that's been developed in the States, another one in China that has been tested. And the vaccines thus far that have been tested, we know, firstly, they are not, in the groups that have been tested, they are not dangerous. By that I mean, nobody, as far as I'm aware, who's been given any of the test vaccines has developed a serious life-threatening complication. The vaccines have not been tested in elderly people, particularly people with a lot of other health problems who you might want to protect against the virus. So we cannot be absolutely certain there are no serious life-threatening complications with the vaccine. But at the moment, that is unlikely. The Oxford vaccine also is the way it is being produced, without going into details, I can if you want, is to bolt a little bit of the genetic material of the virus onto a completely safe other virus, which is not going to cause harm. So we were not expecting the Oxford vaccine to be dangerous. The vaccine itself does cause a number of short-term side effects in the young people who've been tested, giving people flu-like symptoms, arm aches, etc., readily controlled by paracetamol. Will these reactions be more severe in older people? We don't know. Maybe. What we do believe is that one dose of the vaccine will not be enough. People will need, probably, you'll know that for various illnesses you need a booster vaccine. You know, those of you with children or grandchildren will know that polio, diphtheria, etc., you need multiple doses. Almost certainly, to develop sufficient immunity, you will need at least 2 doses of the vaccine. However, the really big unknown is, will this vaccine stop you getting the infection? Now, the way a vaccine stops you getting infection is that it causes the body to develop antibodies that attack the virus once you come up against that virus again. The body can produce antibodies, but those antibodies could be useless. You could have an army full of soldiers, but you aren't giving them any weapons. The research that has been done thus far seems to suggest that the antibodies that this vaccine produces will be antibodies that are capable of killing the virus. It's not a given, but it seems likely. The second unknown about this vaccine is how long it will last. And we can only know how long it will last by studying it for a long period of time. The vaccine is only now just being tested, the first 1,500 or so people, average age of 35. We will only know whether it lasts a year from now. So there's still a lot of work to do on the vaccine. I personally don't believe we will have a vaccine available for widespread use probably before about March, April next year. It may be that we will decide the vaccine is sufficiently safe, and we hope it will be effective, that it will start being used possibly November, December time, without being certain that it will cause sufficient immunity. We'll have to wait and see. So that leaves me to, then I'll do the last thing, then I'll come and answer a lot of the questions that you've asked. So the last thing is, a vaccine natural to achieve herd immunity probably isn't going to happen. Vaccine to achieve herd immunity is some months off. So the only weapon in our armory at the moment is to constrain the spread of an epidemic by what is called social distancing. I don't like the term social distancing, physical distancing, to keep sufficiently away from somebody who may have the virus that it can't spread, and to protect ourselves by washing hands, using face masks, and keeping as far as possible outside as opposed to inside. And the way that really serious epidemics have been successfully addressed in the past have been through this incredibly, if you like, austere, stringent control mechanisms. And if you want one example where this has been really successful, I want to tell you about a virus, not that kills possibly 2% of sufferers. I want to tell you about a virus that possibly kills 50 to 60% of sufferers, which is the Ebola virus. And the Ebola virus is a distant relative of the coronavirus. And they had Ebola virus, as many of you will be aware, in a number of countries in West Africa. And they controlled that pandemic by isolating people who had it, finding out everybody who'd been near that person, isolating them, testing them, track and trace in a way that was done locally within each community. And what could have wiped out significant sections of that population, it remarkably has been controlled. I do regret to say that the virus has spread to such an extent in this country that it is everywhere. I was just looking at some data today. There are 350 local authorities in England, ranging in size from Manchester to small rural communities, each of one which has a separate administration. Within the last 3 days that I have seen data, there were cases of the virus in 250 of those 350 areas in this country. This is a virus that's everywhere. So what I'm going to do now is, if that's okay, Jay, is to go through the questions.
Can you see them as well on the chat?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So somebody mentioned, sadly, that their husband, their partner, was seriously ill and died. But this is a general question. It's having had somebody in the family who was seriously ill, does that still mean that they need to be very careful? Actually, I'm going to reinterpret that question, which is to say, the assumption being that if I had somebody in my very close family, how likely is it that I will be immune, and therefore do I need to be protected? Well, the answer is, of course, you can be tested to see whether you are immune with an antibody. At the moment, we do not know whether if you are immune by having had a close relative, whether you can get the disease again. I've just sent a chat message to everybody. One of the things I've been doing in this infection is producing a blog. You can put your email and subscribe to it. On there, I've answered the issue about whether people can get it again. And the answer is, at the moment, it's unlikely, but we can't rule that out. Somebody asked me, do I think there may be resurgence of the virus in the community after Yom Tov, and what might be reasonably done to reduce this? This is going to be a Yom Tov, sadly, like no other Yom Tov in our lifetime. There is no doubt that the way that we would normally want to behave in shul on Yom Tov, I mean, I'm not just talking about the kissing, but the shaking of hands, the singing, the sounding of the shofar, or what have you. All those things are mega sources of spreading the virus. Sadly, almost certainly, celebrations at Purim, which just happened to coincide with the start of the infection, were almost undoubtedly responsible for major outbreaks in the Jewish community. Somehow. Somebody's asked me, do glasses help to prevent the virus? Sadly, normal spectacles don't. This virus can easily get in and around the eyes. I mean, that is why, for example, you will see health service workers and people in various jobs wearing full face shields.
Alan, if I can just come in there, just to walk back to what you said to us earlier. When you talked about other pandemics that we've seen in the past, especially in Africa, such as Zika and other coronaviruses and so on, why is this one more sophisticated and more virulent, as it were, and more contagious than anything else we've seen? Do we know?
Well, thanks for asking that question. One of the things to be aware of, if you look at the data, they will tell you that there have been something like 303,000 cases of the virus notified and recorded on government databases and sent to the World Health Organization. There are probably, my best guess is there are probably between 3 to 4 million people who've been infected. What does that tell us is that the vast majority of people who have it actually don't get sick and haven't been tested, and that's why it's been able to spread. I think one of the things about if actually people had got sick very, very quickly, had we known about it, if you like, we could have isolated them. Because there are so many people out there who didn't know they had it, either because they had symptoms and didn't recognize the significance, or if you remember, we were told at the beginning, don't bother your GP, stay at home and take paracetamol. But nonetheless, we do know it's only a small minority that get tested. And because of that, it's been allowed to spread. If I may, somebody's asked a really interesting question here. Has the virus not already become less aggressive? Definitely seems to be less serious cases. I think that's a really interesting question. And the answer is for sure, we are seeing far smaller number of deaths. We're seeing far smaller number of people admitted to intensive care units. So I think there are a number of reasons to explain this. One is that it is possible, as I said at the beginning, that it may be that the virus that's coming now is less severe. We can't really take our eyes off the ball, but it is possible. It is possible that it is actually a less aggressive form. What we do know for certain sure is that this virus caused so much havoc because it spread through the most vulnerable people, especially in care homes. And the very high number of deaths in England compared to many other countries are explained predominantly by people being admitted to care homes from hospital who had not been tested, and very elderly, vulnerable people became very sick. And I think what we are being very good at now is protecting the most vulnerable. And interestingly, even people in my age, I don't ask you to guess how old I am, but even people of my age are having a much lower rate of the virus because we're being much more careful. The peak age for getting the virus now is 16 to 24, and we know those people get the disease less seriously. And the dilemma for the government is, well, is it true, therefore, that the virus is becoming less severe? We don't know. It may be that people who would have severe disease are being more careful about not being exposed. Good question.
Who says, is it possible to have its own immunity? How would our question have the statistics of what we call excess death? Are those statistics accurate on the whole, or is there anything that you could comment on further in there?
So sorry, Jay. I lost you at the beginning bit of that question. You broke up on my internet. Could you repeat?
All right. Yes. Is it possible for our bodies to our own immunity, I would imagine, through antibodies? That is the question that was asked. And the second question, that's from myself, regarding excess mortality.
So yeah, sorry again. Sorry, there's something on the transmission of sound here. Are people naturally immune? Was that your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So interestingly, well, of course we only developed the antibody test this year, so we really don't easily know whether there are people out there in the community who are immune anyway. The coronavirus is related to the common cold virus, and some people have suggested that there may be some people who, you know, came into 2020 or already immune. What is clear is that a lot of people have developed an immunity, having developed the virus and not being sick with it. What we also know, and again, if you want further information, it's there on the internet site that I've told you about. Sadly, if you have the severe disease and you are immune, you recovered and you became immune, your immunity, well, it's not mad, will last a long time. If you didn't have the disease badly, that's good news, but you won't have such a powerful immunity. And actually, I got a question here. Is there any more evidence to determine the length of immunity or protection from antibodies in people who've had illness or have natural immunity? That's a really good question. I think Karen asked that question. The answer, Karen, is unfortunately we haven't got sufficiently long enough data. At the moment, it seems to be that for at least 90 days, 3 months following illness, because that's the length of time we have good data from, the immunity still holds. Whether it will still hold for 6 months, we need to find out. Somebody has asked, again, Mary has asked, will everyone need to have the vaccine? That's a really good question, Mary. I mean, there will be some groups of people for whom they shouldn't have vaccines. People who possibly react badly to vaccines or have very severe diseases, maybe people who have cancer or on chemotherapy. But I think this comes back to this whole issue of herd immunity, that we don't need everybody to have the vaccine for the virus to be, if you like, strangled from people out there, that it can continue to transmit the disease. I have to say that my colleagues in the United States are seriously worried, because there is a very, very strong anti-vaccine movement in the United States. Something like 35% of Americans have said, we do not trust a vaccine. We believe this is being put out to boost the profits of drug companies, etc., and we won't have it. And, you know, given how difficult it is to vaccinate everybody just because of logistics, we're going to have a job, or certainly American colleagues are going to have a job in squaring up to people who have fears about vaccination, which are probably unfounded. I've had a number of questions about children. And there's a whole, I mean, and I've had questions from a number of people about children. So one of the issues is that it is quite difficult to wear a face mask for a long period of time, as most of us know. And it is very hard with young children to, as people know, to allow them to get them to continue to wear a face mask. And what should you do in schools? I think the issue is that it's difficult to get sound evidence. What I can tell you is that in countries which have practiced what they would call safe distancing in schools without face masks, such as Denmark, there has not been major outbreaks. There haven't been children catching the disease and spreading it to their parents, which is reassuring, because what's interesting is that children test positive at the same rate as other people in the population. So there's an anxiety, well, why is it anyway that if children seem to be able to contract the virus, that if they are in school, safe distance, practicing what education authorities have done in some countries, outbreaks are not occurring. Although, as you say, intuitively, one might worry if you send your child to school, then is that child going to come back? Somebody has asked me, Laura has asked me, is the antibody test in this country unlikely to pick up many with immunity? We have antibody positive and negative people within our bubble. And some of you will remember that Boris Johnson said the antibody test was going to be, I think I quote his words, a game changer. It's not a game changer. The antibody test is of use to epidemiologists such as myself to know something about the spread of the virus in the community, who's had it and who hasn't had it. The antibody test at the moment, it seems to be accurate as far as we can tell, both in terms of not being positive when you don't have antibodies and not being negative when you do. But as I've said before, the antibodies can wane over time. So you may have antibodies today, but you may not have antibodies next week or in 2 weeks' time. So that may mean, if you're antibody positive, that you're not protected. Similarly, you may think you had the infection. You may think maybe you were near somebody, you lost your sense of taste and smell. And if you'd had the antibody test, it came back negative. And you think, well, I don't understand it. What I need to tell you about the immune system is the body's immune system is quite clever, insofar as there might not be any antibodies now, but when you're faced with the virus, the antibody protection mechanism goes into action and starts producing antibodies. So you may not have antibodies now, but you may start producing them when you need to. The other thing is the body has a second system in the immune system, which is coordinated by cells which go by the wonderful name of killer cells. And these are cells that go out in the body and can kill viruses in other ways apart from the antibody. So in a way, there's kind of good news and bad news on the antibody front. We cannot say for sure that if you've got antibodies now, you will be protected forever. But similarly, we also can't say if you had antibodies or if you had the infection and you are now antibody negative, you won't be protected in the future. And I think because of this uncertainty, my sense is that people are not going to look at your antibody status before deciding whether you need to be vaccinated or not. Whether you have antibodies or not will not determine whether you have a vaccine, which actually Susan then asks a really interesting question here. Can the vaccine be blended with the flu jab so that we can have one jab yearly? Well, I think one of the interesting things is whether actually, in order to get really good protection against the coronavirus, we need to have two different vaccines in the same jab. I mentioned before there's something like 120, 150 different vaccines in different stages of development. And some people are saying, well, actually, maybe one of these vaccines on its own will not be sufficiently protective, and maybe we need to give two together. Now, the thing about the flu jab, some of you will have read that the government is very, very keen for everybody to have the flu jab this year. And I think one of the reasons they want people to have the flu jab is not that it's going to protect us against the COVID vaccine. It is because you can imagine the chaos that's going to be caused in the health service if we have a flu epidemic and everybody goes down and gets temperatures or coughs or what have you, and people say, well, is it the COVID or is it normal seasonal flu? So the big reason we want people to have the flu vaccination this year is so we don't get confused. And also, if you do have the flu immunization and you are ill with flu, if you don't have the flu immunization, sorry, and you're ill with flu, and you get COVID on top, it's likely to be worse. The answer to the specific question is, can the flu vaccine be combined with the COVID vaccine? That's an interesting one. In theory, there is no reason why two vaccines affecting different diseases can't be combined. And as you know, there are multiple, MMR is one vaccine which contains vaccines against three diseases: measles, mumps, and rubella. And that may be something that in future years we might need. I've had a question here from Myrna, but I've seen similar questions from other people, which is about this idea about the virus landing on surfaces and what can we do about it. So at a practical level, and I'll give you the scientific answer in a minute, but at a practical level, the way to ensure safety is, for example, if you've been shopping, if you've been on a bus, if you've been to the garage to collect your car, or you've been to the dry cleaners, or where have you, you've been and you may have touched.
I'm switching it off.
You may have touched door handles or anything. Come back and wash your
Alan, can you?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I'm not sure where I got lost. So Jay, what was the last thing you heard from me?
So that's where we are, and it's not necessarily something in terms of the immune system that is something that we need to worry about. That the
vaccine,
the antibodies.
Yes, sorry, apologies. I didn't realise that I was muted. So yes, so very, very quickly, this idea that people will be vaccinated whether they're immune or not. Somebody's asked about combined with the flu vaccine. Did you hear that answer or not?
Yes.
You did. Okay. So let me talk about surfaces. So the short answer is yes, the vaccine can survive on door handles, on light switches, on lift buttons. We don't know how likely it is. It probably is exceptionally rare. In general, the best thing to do is, if you're concerned, is when you've been out, when you've done some shopping, when you've been to the dry cleaner, when you've been to the petrol station or whatever it is, come in and wash your hands, because the virus dissolves with soap and water. The issue is how long it survives on surfaces is one rather surprisingly we don't know the full answer to. And the reason is this: the test we do for for the virus on surfaces is what's called the RNA test. It's like the swab test, that we detect small amounts of the viral genetic material on surfaces. More likely than not, that genetic material is incapable of infecting a human being. We cannot test for the virus easily. It is almost impossible logistically for me to take this glass, which I have held, for somebody to swab that and see whether there is enough virus on that to cause somebody to have an infection. Even though I might do that and wipe my mouth. They might be able to see whether there's genetic traces where the virus was a day, 2 days, 3 days beforehand. Most people would believe that those genetic traces on their own are highly unlikely to cause you to get the infection, but we don't know. What we do know is that in situations where there is a lot of virus hanging around, and this proved to be the tragic situation in intensive care units where there was inadequate protection in the early stages, that where in intensive care units or care homes where lots of people being ill, and this virus was all over laptops and desktops and all the rest of it, in those highly concentrated areas, yes, it was quite likely that people caught the infection because there was an enormous amount of virus on the surface. In truth, the likelihood that a letter coming through your letterbox, or a can of tuna, or your hanged up, bagged dry cleaning is going to contain the virus that causes you an infection, I think is infinitesimally small. But, this virus will not survive as long as we wash our hands as often as we can. Yes, so somebody said if soap breaks down the outer part of the viral cells, to speak, is it necessary to wash clothes above 30 degrees? As far as I know, Myrna, it is the soap that works on the virus because there's a fat coating of the virus. So it's the soap that gets rid of it. How can testing and taking people's temperature be relied upon when there are, for example, false negatives and people asymptomatic? Absolutely agree with you. It's a complete waste of time. The temperature gauges will only pick up people who have a temperature. One of the, Jay, you asked at the beginning about the virus. This virus has an incubation period of around about 5 days, up to 7 days. What does that mean? It means after contacting the virus, there is a period of 5 up to 7, in extreme cases, up to 10 to 12 days before you become sick, but when you are shedding the virus. So you can walk past every temperature gauge there is. You won't have a temperature, but you can still be shedding the virus.
Alan, if I may just come in with a question there. You did mention it right at the beginning about this line of promising research around a certain type of ultraviolet light on surfaces. Has there been any development there, or?
Well, yes. I mean, we know that ultraviolet light can be virucidal, can kill viruses, but that is, that is the kind of thing that might be used in intensive care units. This is not something that we're going to use in the home. I mean, sunlight is ultraviolet light. Interestingly, as you know, this disease, it spread in winter in England, it spread in summer in a number of countries. This virus may not be as susceptible to ultraviolet light as we know. So somebody's asked here, I've been washing vegetables and fruit since it's medically advised. Would you advise me to continue doing so? I hope I've answered that. I think it is infinitesimally small chance that there will be sufficient virus on a potato or an apple or what have you. But just when you've unpacked the shopping, it makes just sense to wash your hands. Somebody's asked me, can you explain the difference wearing a face mask over a face covering or using a scarf held over the mouth when going into a shop, please? And other questions about masks and things. So, and somebody's asked about, can masks be reused, and the very high KN95 mask that you can buy, etc., etc. So I think to say that, I mean, there's an issue with all these things. We cannot live our lives, normal life, wearing a K95 mask all day. Speaking to colleagues who work in hospitals, some of you will know these, I mean, life with a mask, a fully protective mask, is not easy, and we have to accept that. I think that paper masks, the disposable masks, are maybe better than nothing, but not a lot better. The main purpose of a mask is that the person who is wearing a mask, that the amount of viral particles they are breathing out through their mouth or their nose is substantially reduced. So if they speak, sing, cough, sneeze, shout, and you're wearing a mask, and an effective cloth mask is very effective. If the mask gets wet, then it becomes much less effective. Viruses are very, very, very tiny, and can get through holes. But we know from experiments that have been done looking at the passage of droplets that wearing a mask can stop the passage. So essentially, we're wearing a mask to stop us transmitting to the people around us. So, you know, it's an altruistic act. We also wear masks because I think it's a behavior thing. It's telling the world that we're taking this disease seriously, and, you know, we are, you know, sensitive to the needs of others. Does wearing a face mask protect you? Well, as I said before, a face mask clearly offers protection. It doesn't offer protection for the eyes. It doesn't offer protection if you take off the mask and it's got wet and you rub yourself, etc., etc. So, you know, this is why, you know, when there have been these tragic cases of health service staff or care workers have worn masks, but in some way when they were taking off the mask and they thought they were being careful, they were still transmitting them. So again, if you've got virus on your hands or what have you, you've got to be really careful. So, and that's why hand washing is so important. Somebody's going to ask me, is school going to start on time? Yeah. Well, I guess that's a political question, not necessarily an epidemiological question. You know, you mentioned in the introduction, Jay, that I worked with Michael Marmot. Some of you will know Michael, who's talked about the cycles of deprivation and opportunities in life, and the harm done to children by not being in school, including not having school dinners, being protected from abusive parents, psychological damage, getting addicted to communicating, whatever, etc., etc. And this is weighing up, the harm done to a whole generation of children by not going to school. And people can model about what that might do to a child's physical and mental health, and the morbidity and possible mortality that may cause. I personally, I think, as I say, using experience from other countries, I think we can get our children and our grandchildren back to school. I think we can be creative about, having bubbles, about having different groups coming at different time points. For years in Hong Kong, there was a group of kids that went to school in the morning and another group that went in the afternoon because there wasn't enough school space. We've got lots of gyms and church halls, school halls, or what have you. There's the willingness for people to volunteer. I personally think where there's a will, there's a way. I think we can get our children back to school safely. That's maybe not.
Alan, if I may interject there, I mean, a number of questions have come through, and we do have that from other sources. In terms of, this is from a sociological and behavioural viewpoint. In terms of communities, is there anything that communities need to do above and beyond what they're doing now, which is adhering to, for instance, the latest guidelines in Manchester? Not entirely a lockdown, but households who are not in a bubble cannot be together. And you've explained to us reasoning behind that, which is to keep our distance so that the transmission of the virus doesn't occur. Is there anything else that communities need to be mindful of?
Well, I think it's interesting, because I think one of the problems I think we had a very centralized approach to coping with the virus to begin with. Everything had to be directed centrally from government. And one of the reasons that's put forward why Germany had such a low rate of infections and a low rate of mortality is everything was done at a much more communal level. I mean, there is no doubt that community leaders working with people in health and care services can be, the leaders and the exemplars and the, if you like, the behavior champions of what needs to be done. And I teaching my grandmothers to suck eggs. There's an outpouring of goodwill. One of the tragedies is hundreds of thousands of people volunteered to help and haven't been called upon. And yet there is it's so much can do. We can do. We're talking now with Zoom and all the rest of it. It has transformed our way of, so people don't feel so isolated, doing shopping, etc., etc. And I think one of the problems is that, the health service was not geared up to working with local communities. And I think, each community, and and the Orthodox community in North Manchester is a community, if you're going to get something that's going to work, if it's going to be something that's going to work, whether it's about what you can do about services or preparing for Shabbos, or supporting people who are sick or what have you, that can come from community leaders working with the health authorities. It can't be imposed from the outside.
Can I come in there, Jay? Do you mind?
You certainly can. You certainly can, Richard.
Yeah, sorry, Alan. I'm Richard Gold. I'm a council. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm a councillor in Sedgley.
Yes.
In Prestwich, and I can tell you that there has been a massive amount of cooperation between the Orthodox community and the Haredi community in Prestwich and in Salford with the councils. So I didn't want anyone to think that it wasn't happening. It's been happening constantly throughout the outbreak.
Yeah. Do you think what do you reckon the communication has been between central government and local government?
Awful. I think. I'm not going to say between central government and local government as such, because I'm a councillor and it's not really for me to speak on behalf of the officers. But I can tell you that the feeling is, and I'm not, I am making a political point, is that the communications from the government has been so confusing. I mean, what happened on Friday just was took everybody by surprise and was so vague and was actually put out on Twitter. And it wasn't till Friday morning that I think that it was actually officially on the NHS and coronavirus and the government site. So I think that the problem is the government have been sending mixed messages, and I do have feedback that even at the moment, a lot of people haven't got a clue what they're supposed to be doing or not doing. So I think that communications has been absolutely lacking in its efficiency. And I know I'm a Labour councillor, but I've had a lot of conservative. I do have conservative friends, and a lot of people have said to me, how confusing it is.
Thank you. Just because I don't try to take a couple of questions somebody's asked. Somebody's asked me whether vitamins help. Interestingly, one thought was that vitamin D deficiency is not good, and can possibly make the virus worse. And we get vitamin D from sunlight. And so this is a concern, because we do know in Greater Manchester a lot of people who are vitamin D deficient. And I think probably we do need to be careful if in the Haredi community, for example, people are really all dressed up and they're not exposed to sunlight, their vitamin D levels will be low. And we know that low vitamin D is a risk factor for having bad disease. Somebody's asked me, why are kosher shops and restaurants allowing people into their establishment without masks on? I guess you'll have to ask them. I mean, it's hopefully over the next few days people will realise.
Alan, I have learned so much tonight, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has learned so much tonight. Just about everything, the practicalities, the theory, and everything else. At one point, we had over 100 participants with us tonight, and I'm sure that every one of them had the question answered, directly or indirectly. Now, I will pass on to Dr. Jackie Lewis, who will do the vote of thanks to yourself.
Thank you so much, Jay. So, Professor Allen, we're just incredibly grateful for you attending tonight and giving us such clarity over a really difficult topic, and for fielding the questions and sifting through them, multitasking all evening. You've just been wonderful. I'm sure everybody in the audience is really, really grateful. You've been inspirational. I found the information on antibodies, for example, particularly interesting, on vaccines. You've covered so many areas of this topic. I wondered, could you very quickly just repeat to us the details of how to get onto your blog? Because I wasn't sure if it was down in full in the chat box.
Yeah, I've just sent the thing on the chat to everybody.
So it's okay. Hopefully we can all get on. That's so helpful because people will want to.
Yes. So there's there's a lot more information I've been able to get, and as I said, if you add your email address, then you'll get a message in your mailbox when something else has been added. So and I'm trying to keep up to date as much as I can.
Yeah. So, Alan, is that making sense of COVID-19 with s.com, or is there a bit missing there?
That's it.
That's the full link. So, thank you all so very much to Jay for chairing tonight, and to our wonderful audience. A full house. We can't believe it. This is a first for our organisation. So, not surprising with such a wonderful speaker tonight. And thank you, audience, hoping you all keep safe and well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Very special. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's been very special.
Thank you.
Thank you from Jackie Harrison as co-chair. Very interesting and informative. Appreciate all your time, Alan.
Thank you
and
very
Jay
much.
and Dr. Jackie.
Thank you everybody who made it possible. Thank you very, very much indeed. I did. I said thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Silman. Very inspiring, very informative. Thank you for spending time with the soft healthy communities. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Thank you. It's very helpful and informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an amazing lecture. Really appreciate it.
Mr. Silman, is it all right if I ask the question, please?
Yeah, okay, yes.
I'm sorry, I had to attend my baby. I missed what you answered about the safety of going to the schools for the kids right now in a few weeks.
Sorry, the sound quality is not very good.
I said that I missed out on what you said for the children going to school in a few weeks.
Yeah, so basically, I think life's a compromise, but my short message is I think countries such as Denmark have shown that you can get your kids back to school safely. It needs, management of space and logistics, etc., but it can be done.
Even without the vaccine or anything,
the vaccine is not going to be here till next spring, I think. I think maybe for high-risk groups, maybe for healthcare professionals, for fairly maybe elderly, very vulnerable people, they may start vaccinating them in the autumn, but it's for wide population use. It's well into next year.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question, please?
Mm-hmm.
How much vitamin D do you expect to take daily, please?
Oh, gosh, you've caught me on the hop there. I mean, most of our vitamin D, actually, we get from sunlight. The amount of vitamin D we need to take from food if we're exposed to sunlight is relatively little. And a lot of our foods are fortified with vitamin D. So if you have a mixed diet, particularly with dairy food, I mean, just a normal mixed dairy diet. I think the problem comes for people who are vegan. So if you're a vegan and you're not having sunlight, I mean, there is vitamin D in some plant food, particularly some oils and nuts and things. You just got to be careful. But a normal mixed diet, you should be okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Could I jump in there, Ellen? Sorry, as a GP, I could quickly just mention to this lady, if you're orthodox and you cover up in the winter, then you may well need to take a supplement through the winter, and a dose of between 400 units and 1,000 units a day is about average. But if during this lovely summer, if you're getting outside and getting sun on your face and your forearms, that's helpful. And eggs and fish, oily fish, are other great sources.
Thank you. Thank you. And a multivitamin wouldn't have it inside?
Some do, but they it may be a low dose.
It says 50 ml on the ingredients.
50 ml, I'm not sure, but
thank you ever so much.
If you speak to your pharmacist, they will.
Yeah, you know, vitamin D deficiency is a major health problem. You know, it probably increases the risk of several conditions, and you know, in terms of our general musculoskeletal health, how strong our muscles are, how strong our bones are. Yeah. I must go. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you,
it
Alan.
was special. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks for organizing it. Very, very special. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to have another evening, Jay. Another one.
Yes, please, God, soon. Yes, we will let you know.
Because a lot of people, I think, who wanted to get on, but
hopefully next time we'll have a webinar. We'll have 250 people and more, please.
We'll have that, no problem. Thank you very much.